Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is a fabulous dahlia. It's called Grenadier and has got this intense red bloom, and then it develops its yellow center before the flowers fade and then new buds are formed. The only downside to it is that the stem is rather thin, and the weight of the flower can bend it over and actually break the whole shoot going right back down to the base. So I've given them a little bit of support. Now, not all dahlias need this kind of support. Some, like Tamburo I've got there, the dark red flowers are held on really quite sturdy stems. Now, we do try and stop the dahlias, particularly at this time of year, from getting too big, because what you're going to end up with is a lot of growth and all the flowers will be finished. So we deadhead. And it is really important not just to snip off the flower head, because what you're going to be left with is this stem, and it looks ugly and somehow loses the allure of the plant. So what you need to do is deadhead, going right back down to the next visible bud or leaf. If you deadhead regularly, they will flower richly and often. Now, coming up in today's program, we go to Cornwall to meet a designer who creates unconventional gardens and meadows that not only look beautiful, but are highly productive too.
And here's a turnip, and these are quick crops, so you can get lots of food out of your meadow before the flowers start taking over.
Carol celebrates one of summer's most ethereally elegant flowers.
Phylloxerums have poise and poetry, and though they may overlook other plants, they never overshadow them.
And I shall be cutting a wildflower meadow, well, a wildflower meadow of sorts, at any rate, with a pair of shears. Come on. Come on, Nell. The vegetable garden has had a good year so far. I've got some lettuce here, which will be ready for harvesting really in late summer, early autumn. And the idea of lettuce is just to keep succession growing. But that does mean good timing and good choice of varieties. This one here, which is a Lobjoy's Cos, prefers warmer summer weather. And this is a cut and come again variety. This is a red oak leaf, and I'll get at least 2 cuttings of that before the end of the year. It's always tempting to grow too much of one variety of lettuce. Far better to have small amounts of different varieties which are enough, but not too much. Now, a Cos lettuce has got that lovely crisp heart, but it grows tall and is really, I suppose, my favourite. And the 2 best summer Coses are this, which is Lobjoy's, and there's Paris Island is another really good variety. But whatever variety, I always grow them the same way nowadays, which is to sow them in a seed tray and then prick them out into plugs, grow them on, and then plant them out when they're this size. And this all started because I found when I direct sowed, the slugs and the snails could devastate them just as they appeared above the ground. Whereas if I grow these on in the protection of a greenhouse and cold frames, and I really watch out for slugs in particular here, then they get nice and strong and young and healthy. And if I plant them out at this size, they can withstand slug attack. Of course, the Lobjoy you cut, and that's it. You've made your harvest. It will grow back, but it will never form a heart again. Whereas an oak leaf is loose, it has no heart, and if you keep cutting it, it'll keep regrowing. And as long as I protect it from the worst of the cold, this will go on giving a harvest certainly into Christmas time, and they will grow happily in an unheated greenhouse right through the winter. And a raised bed like this is perfect because it's so easy to plant. Using my fingers, the soil is nice and moist, it's warm. These will grow fast. The other thing to bear in mind is that the rate of growth now gets slower and slower as we move through summer into autumn because the light levels are falling. So allow a little bit more time. I've been growing vegetables all my life and do so in a very conventional fashion, I suppose. But there's a new generation of gardeners who are coming to the fore, who are challenging received ideas, and long may they do so. And we went to visit one of them, Sid Hill, down in Cornwall, who is growing his vegetables in not just an effective way, but a very beautiful one too.
I had a bit of a different upbringing. I was home educated and I actually travelled Europe as a child, and then my dad bought a small holding in Portugal and we had 7 acres. So instead of going to school and learning about academic subjects, I was taught how to grow my own food. I was given my first vegetable garden at 10. We were growing food ecologically, and what that means is we were growing across the landscape with diverse plants growing together. When people came to see it, if they didn't understand that this was a food-producing system, they would have just seen it as a field of weeds. And I saw that there was a missing link here. There was these really productive gardens, and then there was these botanical gardens which have this wow factor. I saw there being an opportunity to design these seed mixes to be able to create really diverse, abundant herbaceous plantings at low cost from seed, but incorporating edible plants from around the world. This meadow I only sowed 3 months ago and it's already looking beautiful and there's loads to eat. In this meadow there are 30 different edible species. Right now I'm picking some sorrel, which is on the ground cover layer. It's got quite large leaves which covers the ground around it, and it doesn't mind a little bit of shade. It has a really nice sour taste and it adds flavour to a salad. This one here is chrysanthemum greens, which is an annual, adds really beautiful colour to the meadow in the first year, but the leaves have a really nice taste. It's lovely. And here's a turnip. Look at that, isn't that a beauty? So this is in the annual veg layer, which I actually included these because when you start off a meadow, there's loads of gaps, and what I found is actually this is a perfect opportunity to incorporate some annual veg like turnips, beetroot or radish. And these are quick crops, so you can get lots of food out of your meadow before the flowers, as you can see here, start taking over. 3 key tips for a successful meadow are buying quality seed from a reliable source, preparing the ground and making sure there's no competitive weeds from the beginning, and looking after your meadow into the future, weeding out any undesirable species and making sure you water in dry weather. There we have it. Here's a fresh salad ready for our lunch, picked from the edible meadow. Plants are social beings. They grow in close-knit communities together. If you look at a woodland, a meadow, a hedgerow, you'll find plants interwoven together and growing and thriving. So in my gardens, I look at natural plant communities and I mimic that structure, but each layer of the planting is either an edible or useful plant, or it's there for its beauty. This is one of the ecological gardens I created last year. So here we've got the canopy tree. This is a cordyline, and the leaves of this are used for fibre. They're very tough. And I've only got a few of these in the garden so they don't cast shade on the ground layer. And then when we come down through the layers, we've got a dwarf apple tree. These are small trees that you can prune so that you can have a lot in a small space without them dominating other plants. And then there's a shrub layer where I've got a diversity of different edible and useful shrubs. Here I've got blackcurrant, I've got gooseberries and hibiscus, which hibiscus is great for making tea. Then there is a herbaceous layer that covers the ground. And what I did here is I sowed a woodland meadow, and then I plugged in lots of different edible perennials. Things like this ocker that has an edible leaf. The stalks can be used a bit like rhubarb, and then it has these tubers on the bottom that can be used like potatoes. I've included this fennel, which is a nice tall plant with feathery leaves, and this is included for tea once again because it makes a beautiful tea that is good for digestive. You might be wondering what this is, and this is actually an artistic habitat pile of dry stones stacked. And these were actually taken from the soil as I was digging it over and preparing it for seeding and planting. And what this does is it captures in the day the warmth of the sun, and then it radiates that at night, creating a perfect microclimate for nesting insects, which go into all the crevices and create a home for themselves. What I'm doing here is I'm planting echinacea, and I'm planting these throughout the garden because with a wild garden like this, if you don't have repeated forms and colour through the garden, it can be really hard to understand it. So if you look here, we've got this repetition of this contrasting red. Giving a beneficial garden like this that wow factor, it makes it more attractive to people to take on this more wilder approach of gardening. Much of the time when we're creating gardens, they're really just a feature on the landscape, just to look purely ornamental. And I think horticulture is moving away from that now. And what inspires me is creating these gardens that not only look beautiful, but they produce food, they are biodiverse, gardens that are maximising the benefits they can provide and securing a sustainable future.
If we all look after our gardens as we want the world to be looked after, then we're heading definitely in the right direction. Now, what Sid was making, very beautifully, was essentially an annual meadow. And these are plants that grow in arable fields on bare soil. The seed drops and then they grow back, or you add to it year on year, which is why you can add vegetables in. But what I've been growing here are hay meadows. It's essentially permanent grass with wildflowers in it. And this strip here, last summer, I sowed a special mix of wildflowers designed to grow underneath a hedge, and that is beginning to come into fruition. Now, the key plant in that mix was this, yellow rattle. When they're dry and the seeds are in there, they rattle as you walk past it. And the crucial thing about yellow rattle is that it's semi-parasitic on grass. So where this grows strongly, grass grows weakly. Now, what you have to do if you want a grass meadow is treat it like hay. So let it grow uncut right through till midsummer. Personally, I would leave it till August always, and that gives plants like yellow rattle a chance to seed. Then you must cut it and take the grass away. You'll never get a mower through that. I've got a scythe, which is quite effective. Cut it like this, and you can see that it's cutting it back quite successfully. Not everybody has a scythe to hand. It's perfectly okay to use a pair of shears. Just get in there and clip really tight to the ground. And then you need to rake it up. And as I do it, you can see that I've got earth appearing. And that's perfect, because many plants will only germinate when the seed is in direct contact with soil. And it will look completely barren for a week or so, and then it will regrow. I can then mow it along with the rest of the grass without doing any damage to the wildflowers. But the reason why anyone would make a wildflower meadow of any size is that other than the pond, there is nothing else that's better for wildlife. And also, it looks wonderful. And the great secret is that you don't need a big space. You can grow it in a strip alongside a path or a hedge, a square metre in the corner of the garden, even in a window box or a container. It'll have the same beneficial effect and give the same huge amount of pleasure to you. Now it's time to make our first visit to one of your gardens. And we start in Sussex with the Garnham family, who have begun to grow their favourite flower from seed.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I live here in Hassocks near Brighton with my wife Hannah and my children Stanley and Jennifer. Hannah loves pansies, so we thought we'd have our first ever go at using a seed tray and pricking out the seedlings for potting on. Here's how we did. Can you help me put soil in these?
Oh, yeah.
First we filled some pots with compost. It's made so much mess, Jennifer.
Oh, yeah. I'll pick it up later.
You'll pick it up later?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is all fresh compost. And I'm making a little hole in there. I'm pretty sure Monty always says take them out by the leaf, not the stem. One done. Now for loads more. This was going okay, but I needed some help to speed things up. Pick up that one there with that leaf. By that leaf. Yeah. Perfect. Now drop it in.
36, 37, 38.
38 pansy plants. And these are all reused pots. Stanley, why is it good to recycle?
Because it looks after the planet.
Hopefully we won't have to wait too long until we see some flowers. Here we go, look.
That looks awesome.
That's our first one. Jen, what colour is it?
It's yellow.
It's yellow.
Yeah, it's red.
And purple. That's our first one.
Yellow and purple.
So everybody, did you enjoy growing the pansies?
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan has certainly been very successful in growing those pansies. They look completely healthy. Love the fuchsias too, by the way. And that magic always works, to see Jennifer and Stanley's faces as these plants appear with flowers. And they will go on flowering now for most of the winter. 100% success. Now, I want to sow some seeds at this point for next year. And normally you do this for biennials. You sow them late spring, midsummer, and they germinate, become small plants, and then do their flowering in the following spring and summer. But I've got two different types here. I've got an annual, which is scabious, and a perennial, penstemon. Seed-sown penstemon tend to suffer from cold more, so they do need extra good drainage, and just be prepared that if we have a really cold snap, blow about -5, you may lose a lot. But it's a packet of seeds, and that's the great advantage of growing from seed. So, first thing I need to do is some compost. This is my seed mix, which has a lot of vermiculite, leaf mould, some coir-based compost, a little bit of soil, because that adds bacteria, and seeds germinate very well in them. Now, this is a variety of penstemon called Scarlet Queen, pink with a white interior. And if I pour them into my hand, you can see the seeds are quite small, but I want to sow them as thinly as possible. And just sprinkle them on the surface. I will cover that very lightly with some vermiculite, and that will protect the seed as much as anything else. I'm just going to firm them down a little. I'm not compacting it. I'm just pushing the seed into the soil. Now, those are perennials grown from seed. At the same time, I've got here an annual, and I love scabious. Scabious of all kinds, but this is the common Scabious atropurpurea black knight. And it's got really rich burgundy colours with little white centres, flowering very late, late summer into autumn. And if I sow seed now, I can get them to flower a little bit earlier. So the same compost into a seed tray. Just try and, if I put them individually, it makes pricking out so much easier if you take a little bit of trouble at the seed sowing stage. Right, I'll just push those down again so they're making contact. Cover them over. You can use grit for this, but vermiculite is a lot lighter and cheaper, and they will grow through that perfectly well. I will put these in the greenhouse, give them a really good soak and not let them dry out. And I would expect in about 5 or maybe 6 weeks' time, they will be ready to pot on, and I'll do that with you, and then I will store them over winter. And now is the time to be thinking about your garden next summer, because there are things that you can do and plant and sow to make it even better. But we've got another chance now to see a garden that Carol visited. Very nice to see those Thalictrums at Aberglasney again. I love them. We have quite a few here in the garden. And we also have one which has completely made itself at home. It's a weed, it grows every year in amongst the hedges and is absolutely part and parcel of the garden. We love it. Now, I'm watering the tomatoes, but I do confess that I haven't really had my watering regime up to scratch, and there's hard evidence of that. Because if you look here, you'll see a calloused, darkened wound on the bottom of that tomato, and this is the classic symptom of blossom end rot. It is caused by a lack or shortage of calcium. And what it means is that I've watered either too much, too little, and greenhouse tomatoes, above all else, thrive with regular water, regular sunlight, and regular heat. But if you get the watering regime right, you hardly ever see blossom end rot. Now, that's the bad news, because there's nothing I can do to rescue that fruit. The good news is it won't harm you, and it won't harm the plant. It's not a fungus, it's not a disease, it's a symptom of a nutritional lack. So if I get the watering right, that won't occur on any of the unripe fruit yet to come. Now, still to come on today's programme. We meet a gardener who was inspired by childhood memories to recreate her grandmother's Caribbean garden in mid-Wales. But first, we're going to visit one of your gardens, and Peter and Rachel Glassman have sent us this film all the way from Canada.
Hi, I'm Peter, and this is our garden in Gibsons, British Columbia in Canada. When we first found this property about 15 years ago, the slope you see over my shoulder, which is very long and very high, was absolutely overrun with dying trees, with blackberry growth, with vines. Over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I've been working on trying to convert this into a meadow that would be good for pollinating bees and attractive to butterflies and hummingbirds, and allow us to see the sea which lies below. I've loved gardening all my life. I'm 75 years old now, and I remember vividly being taught to garden by my mother. It is very fulfilling, but hard work. The hill is steep. I'm not that agile, and so I clamber around on this hill with some degree of confidence and maybe a little bit of an edge of fear. I extract buried root systems and try to deal with tangles of ivy and fall a lot and get up a lot and do it again. It's lovely to be among other forms of living beings, especially during this period of quarantining for our country and for the whole world. It has brought about so much serenity and hope and comfort and joy.
I'm full of admiration for Peter's determination, his horticultural skill, and his good humour. A lovely garden. But it couldn't be more different from Longmeadow, which is pretty much dead flat. What that does mean is that I can create long vistas. And I've got them running down the garden and a couple running across. And this is one of them. This is the lime walk. And at this time of year, it couldn't be more simple, really. You just have the repeated rhythm of the pleach limes with their bare trunks, underplanted with ferns. These are all Dryopteris, and a little light coming through and falling on the hornbeam leaves of the hedge on this side, and that's just about it. But at times, you don't need to have busy, complicated, or even colourful planting to create a good effect. Now, last summer, we paid a visit to Mark Lane's garden. And as he showed us around, he explained that the secret of keeping it looking so good was down to his careful selection of
a grabber, pull it round the base of the plant, because then you can just lower it down into...
Come on, Patty. I think all of us share Mark's experience of having certain tools that are just dead right for us doing certain jobs. Now, we always had a pond here in the wildlife garden, absolutely essential if you want to attract wildlife. And it was nice, but not quite right. It was tucked away too much to one side. So we took everything out, enlarged it, pulled it towards the centre, and then put the plants back in. And actually, it's made all the difference in the world. The whole garden now suddenly feels centred around it. Now, I was going to plant a water lily a few weeks ago, but then I hurt my back. So the water lily, which is a Nymphea alba, has lived in that bucket for the last 3 weeks. At the moment, this is quite small. It's planted in a basket, which means that the water can drain out and the water can get in. That's really critical. And subsoil is ideal for aquatic plants. Do not use a normal potting compost or your garden soil. It'd be too rich for them. And the whole point about aquatic plants is they spend their entire lives completely submerged, except for the flowers and the foliage. The plant needs to sink down if they are to sit easily on the surface and not spreading too laterally. Right, time to get in. It's quite shallow here because I deliberately made it, as you should any wildlife pond, so that very gradually it gets deeper. And this means that any mammals, or birds for that matter, can come to the water and drink and safely not just get in, but get out. When you do this in your pond, you will have to experiment. You'll just have to try out different pot sizes, which is why putting bricks inside a pot is quite a good wheeze, because then you just sink the whole thing in and that makes life easier. Perfect. There we are. So the leaves are just on the surface. They will get light, they will grow quite quickly and start to spread. And then as they spread outwards, it means that I can take a brick away, and so they go more vertically down into the water until it's fully grown and may well be able to sit on the bottom of the pond and be covered, I hope, with those glorious white lilies from late spring to late summer. Now, gardeners are increasingly aware of the importance of wildlife in gardens, and a lot of you have sent in films celebrating the wildlife in your own gardens at home. Now, we've looked at them all, but I'm afraid we just haven't got time or room to show them all. So what we've done is to take some of our favourite moments and put them together.
Hello, I'm Isabel. This is our nature garden. I like all the animals and birds and the wildlife that lives around us.
We wanted to create a haven for pollinating insects.
And what better way to do that than to build a giant bug house?
Or insect hotels?
Bug hotel.
Be a bug house.
A 5-star bug hotel complete with swimming pool.
I started photographing insects and invertebrates a few years ago, and now I've got so many in the garden, it means I'm never short of subject material.
That is a morning cloak butterfly. The kids love getting up close to see that nature. Butterflies, bees, and birds of all sorts.
Because we love watching just what comes to our door.
It's magic.
Oh wow, look at these beauties.
I don't know if you can hear it, but there's our wildlife pond and our 4 frogs.
It's great to know that so many animals now call this garden home.
It's a haven now, and it's given us so much joy.
That's all we got today. Bye!
Thank you, everybody, for sending in so many films. I'm sorry we couldn't show more, but you can actually see more on our social media pages. And we've had lots of people asking about the family of swallows that were nesting in the tool shed. I showed you that a couple of weeks ago. They have fledged, they've left the nest, they're still zipping in and out of the potting shed, roosting in there at night. And the parents are actually laying a second clutch in the same nest, which they will rear before the summer is out. So that is all going really well. Now, I'm digging out this magnolia because it hasn't gone really well. This is Magnolia Black Tulip. And in theory, it's got the richest, darkest, most voluptuous flowers on almost any plant you can grow in the garden. Trouble is, I can't grow it. Frost hits it, and it kills all the buds, it kills back the new growth, and it clings on to life. But this year, it's failed to cling on well enough, and it has died on me. That is coming out too easily, and oh dear, no. You can see the root system is pathetic. That is very dead indeed. However, I have a replacement. How about this? This is actually a variety of mountain ash called Cardinal Royal. And I've chosen it really for its berries. They first start to colour up in mid-July, and by the end of August, they're a wonderful mixture of deep oranges and reds, and they're one of the first berries that the birds gorge themselves on in autumn as the weather starts to get a bit colder. The flowers appear in spring. They're great for bees and flies, although they're also self-pollinating, so you don't need two to produce the berries. And it will grow in almost any soil. If you've got really poor sandy or chalky soil, it won't mind. When you're planting any tree, the essence is to dig a shallow hole that's quite wide. Now, the next stage is to put into position and then put a stake in. Now, I've got one here, so if I put that there, when you're staking a tree, as long as that stake is in securely, it can be quite low down. It doesn't need to run up the full length of the tree. Now we can plant it. Nice roots, good root system. I'm just teasing them a little. Ties are designed to allow the tree to move. So don't tie it up so tight that it's pressed hard against the post. Right, now we will backfill around that. I will give this a really generous mulch with compost to make sure that it is well watered every week for the rest of this growing season. But I'm very confident that this will be much more at home here than that poor old magnolia ever was. Now, a few weeks ago, we went to Newtown in mid-Wales to visit the garden of Dolly Childs, who created her garden based upon a host of happy childhood memories.
When I come in my garden, I escape to another place. I feel a sense of peace, tranquility, and happiness. Seeing the sunlight filtering all through the leaves and the light breeze and the sounds of the birds singing is like a paradise to me. I grew up in Jamaica, West Indies, in East Portland, up in Scotland. Creating a garden like this remind me of home. It take me back to my childhood, walking down a hill and seeing the sunrise coming up, seeing the sea and all the ponciana and the bloom and the flowers and everything just bursting out. I came over in 1976 after I just got married, and I looked at my husband and I went, oh my God, he's freezing, yeah? Sorry. I said to him, where are the tropical plants? Oh, the house looked grey. I said, where there's no river, where I can't stay here. Sorry. My children left home. They grew up and left home. I miss them. I miss them terrible. And once missed them, I start thinking about home again. So I started a garden and I joined Newtown Gardening Club. And those were the days you get 50p plants, so you get swap. And I started to build on it slowly. From ever since, I just keep on with the garden. The plants in itself, I don't just plant. I visualize where they're going to be because I try to bring back the memory of what I've actually seen as a child. And even now, I can visualize the pathway down the river, the leaves, the trees, the brooks, the fruits, everything is just clear, still in my head. You wouldn't believe how I get this plant. I visit a place, Hunt Avenue in Newtown, and it was growing on a bank. I said to the caretaker, you mind if I had a bit of cutting of that plant? And she said, why do you ask? I said, it reminds me of home, this very tropical looking. And she gave me a cuttings, and from the cuttings, this is how I have this. It's been here now 3 years, and every year I come out, and it just reminds me walking down through the bush in Jamaica. Here in Wales, the climate is one of my drawbacks, and I learned there must be a way of getting foliage, colour. And I noticed that some of the plants were the same, so I find a lookalike plant that can withstand the harsh winter, like the rice plant, the japonica, and the hardy palms, which has got leaves looking like coconut trees. This is another plant of my lookalike tropical plants, named Palomia foxglove tree. It's a hardy perennial. It lost its leaf in the winter, but come back springtime. Some of these trees, they actually flower, but what I did is to cut back the plant in springtime to get the foliage, because the foliage is bring back memory of seeing a lot of trees with the big trumpet leaves or foliage growing in the tropics. I bought it about $3.99 a long time ago. I look for bargains in the shops. You don't have to keep on going out and buying a lot of small plants to make it look tropical. Few plants like this give a big impact to a small garden. I collect horse manure, but it's real rotten horse manure. And the banana, they love it. I started up on the hills, and my husband said, you crazy going up there asking them for horse manure? I said, well, the garden needs it. And from there on, a lot of people know that, oh, Dolly wants horse manure, so chilly for the garden. So when they come and visit the garden, they said, how did you manage to have it so lush and green? I said, horse manure. My garden has been influenced by my grandmother was from the Arawak Indian Taino tribe. She get plants and ground it and make it into medication. My grand would go and say, go and pick this plant or that plant, and she will make it as a herbal tea. We live in the countryside up in the mountain, and there was no doctor. And as a premature baby, my grandmother used plants to help me to survive. So it gave me life. My grandmother used to like eating this plant. In Jamaica, we call it taro plant, but this one is called pink china. And the taro is like a tuber, and that when the tuber is fit enough to be eaten, it contains a lot of carbohydrates and it gives you a lot of energy. It's very hardy. I left it out in the winter and it come back. My grandmother, one of the things was that she will not have her photograph taken because she believes that you take away her spirit. So a lot of things in the garden just remind me of my gran. This garden, it really gives me a sense of well-being, security, and how to survive in life. And my way of surviving is to have memories, and they're sweet memories.
As well as being a lovely garden, I love the way that Dolly associated the spirit and soul of her grandmother, as well as the visual memories, with plants. Now, I've got some cuttings, the hydrangea Annabelle, and a good tip is to buy the biggest plant that you can possibly afford and use it as a mother plant. So you take cuttings from it before you plant it out, nurture the cuttings, and then the following year you're going to have 2, 3, or maybe more. I took these in the middle of June. Now, I haven't checked it. I don't know they've rooted. So what you do is just tip it out. Now, this is in pure perlite. There's nothing else here at all. And you can see if I hold that up, there are a lot of fine roots growing out. And you may be wondering, how on earth can that survive in perlite, which has got no goodness in it at all? It's an inorganic medium. For a plant to root, it needs water and it needs oxygen. And as long as you keep that wet, you end up with roots like that. Now, that's fine, but as it starts to grow, it's going to run out of food and the plant will suffer. So you need to pot it on. Hydrangeas like a fairly rich soil, moist, well drained. So gently sieve the soil around it, give it a shake. I'm not going to firm it in, but those very fine roots will now start to grow in the soil and start to take up goodness, as well as water and oxygen. I shall now give these a good drink, put them in a cold frame for a couple of weeks just to protect them as they get going, and then they can stand in a sheltered area outside. They're perfectly hardy and be ready to plant out where I want them to grow early next spring. Now, I love this stage of potting on successful cuttings. So I hope you enjoy these jobs that I've got for you this weekend. If you grow plums or cherries and feel you must prune them, the time to do this is in a dry spell in summer, and that will reduce the risk of bacterial canker, which can be a killer. And in any event, never prune them in the winter months. If you're going away for a few days and you have lots of pots, particularly if they're made out of terracotta, group them tightly together in the shade. And this will mean that they dry out much less and therefore will be healthier when you return. I know I've said this before, but it is worth repeating. and that is to deadhead and keep deadheading. And not just the usual suspects like dahlias, but ephophias, aleniums, buddleia, sunflowers. They will all continue to flower and go on flowering for as long as possible if you keep deadheading. Well, this is certainly the Jewel Garden's hour. It is positively bubbling and erupting with rich colour. The sunflowers are out with their shades of yellow through to caramel. There are the oranges of the Tithonias, the flare of flower on the cannas, and those wonderful burgundy banana leaves. Who needs flowers when you have foliage that looks as good as that? And we've got the shocking pink of this phlox that was meant to be magenta, but was the wrong shade. And we've never had the heart to take it out, and it's been flowering like this for 20 years and probably will for another 20 years. But no more flowering today because we've run out of time, and I'm away next week. So you'll be with Adam in his garden at the later time of 9 o'clock, and I'll be back here at Longmeadow in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, bye-bye.